Today, we're going to talk more about task planning. Last week, we covered task mode, the breakdown structure that you should do, the work breakdown structure, and the different kinds of tasks you can have. And then we talked about task type and then the difference between work versus duration. Today, we're going to go over those topics in just a little bit of a recap section, and then we're going to keep building out and linking our tasks together. My name is Amanda Kuhlman. I am the operations manager here at Intigent. I have been here for almost 7 years, and I am an avid Microsoft project user. I use it every day internally as an organization and probably have encountered a lot of the questions and things that you're looking at and getting answered here today. I am certified in Microsoft PPM, in Microsoft Project, and in SharePoint. And I am also exploring Power BI as well. So if you're interested in that, please let me know. So today is part of our webinar series about learning about Microsoft Project Essentials. Just the very basics to get you up and running and being able to manage your schedule after all the setup has been completed. So as you can see, we had a couple of other ones. This is our third webinar series. We had the first one that focused primarily on Microsoft Project Interface. It looked at the views, setting up some default project options, and then getting the very beginnings of your project schedule going, how to set your project calendar, how to set your project start date, and a couple of other those back-end settings that are important to pay attention to before you build out your schedule. So if you did miss that one, it is on our website. And then last week, we focused on task planning part 1. As I mentioned, just the very basics and setting up your schedule and how to get your tasks actually in your plan. So we do have, next week is going to be our resource planning. And then the other ones have still yet to be scheduled, but we are going to do assignments planning probably the week right before Thanksgiving, and then we'll pick it back up after the holidays. So first today, we're going to talk a little bit about us, about Intigent and who we are and what we do. And then we're going to jump right into our task planning. We're going to look at the different kinds of task dependencies. We're going to talk about what the different kinds are, how you set them, what that means in terms of how the tasks are going to relate to each other, and how to create a very dynamic schedule so that once you get into the execution, you can understand the flow of your schedule and what it's going to do. You can anticipate what changes are going to do. And then we're going to talk about lead time and lag time between your tasks. It's under dependencies, but we keep it as its own separate topic here. And then last today, we're going to look at setting constraints, such as soon as possible when it comes to scheduling tasks and deadlines. So Intigent, who are we? We are a consulting firm whose primary focus is Microsoft Project, Project Server, and Project Online. We are expanding into SharePoint and Dynamics right now, but primarily we have always been a very project and project server focus. We implement the software, we train users on how to use it, we help people build out their PMO, their processes, we talk them through how to marry what they do in their business to what the tool can provide for you. And anything that has to do with being a PM and managing, we can help you with that. We are Microsoft Gold Partner certified in project and portfolio management. That means that our organization is recognized by Microsoft as having accomplished several skills. We have a lot of trainers on staff who have had to pass some certifications to be able to get us qualified to be a Gold Partner. And we're also a part of the Project Management Institute, and a lot of our courses will earn PDUs. Our full day courses will earn PDUs as a result of that. So we're going to do a quick recap about what we talked about last time, just in case you missed it. The last webinar should be posted on our website, but if it is not, it should be up there soon. So we are going to talk briefly about these topics here. I will look at our project schedule just so we can look at how we set it up. We're going to use a more specific example. Last time we used task 1, task 2. I have a different example today with actual some true task names in there. So we're going to talk about task mode, manual versus automatic scheduling, the pros of automatic scheduling and why we recommend that. And then we're going to look at the work breakdown structure. the summary tasks, the milestones, all of these key building blocks that make up your project schedule. The way you order them and the way the flow is very important and definitely worth some forethought and organization when it comes to your project schedule. Then we're going to look probably very briefly at entering tasks. It's something we focused on last time, the different methods and approaches that you have to entering your tasks. And then we're going to look at task type, fixed duration, fixed work, and fixed units. What are they? What do they mean? How to update that? And then briefly about estimating work and duration. Last week, we did talk about having a work-focused plan versus a duration-focused plan, what the main difference is, and some pros and cons to each different scheduling method. So task mode. The two types of task mode are manually scheduled and automatically scheduled. Manually scheduled, we always say it's like an Excel spreadsheet. It's basically just a task list. You're not really asking project to do much of the calculations for you. You're saying that I'll provide the information to you. Versus automatically scheduled. This is where project will automatically schedule and calculate dates, start dates, finish dates, work, all of that just by the fact that it's automatically scheduled. You're asking Microsoft Project as a scheduling tool to do more of that for you. You can change these for your project or for your entire Microsoft Pro client or for a specific task. But I always set mine in project options to always be automatically scheduled and just leave it that way. I don't think I've ever actually had a schedule that I use that's manually scheduled. We talked about the work breakdown structure, what the summary tasks look like and what their function is. They are primarily the roll-ups of the tasks underneath them. They summarize what that phase or stage primarily is about, and it'll give you all of that rolled up in a nice, neat line. And at the top, it's bolded, makes it very easy for you to see. And when you're thinking about your work breakdown structure, the first thing you need to think about is how can you best organize what you have? Are you given a task list? Are you actually given a work breakdown structure to work with? And how can you put that together in a format that makes sense for you? It's easy to read, and it's easy for you to, most importantly, manage once you get your schedule running. The three different task types here, we have fixed duration, fixed units, and fixed work. The word fixed is very important here. This is what is going to stay constant. These three pieces work together as kind of a triad or triangle to say what is going to stay consistent and what is going to change once you add things like resources to your task, or you update your duration to be twice what it originally was. If you have a fixed duration task and you update it to be from 5 days to 10 days, your duration is going to stay the same, and the work and the resources units associated with that are going to be what changes in here. So this graphic we have up here just shows you very briefly what those changes are going to be. Like I said, at the top, we have the fixed duration one. If you update your duration, you're going to have a change to your work. Something has to change for the task to be able to reschedule appropriately. If you update your units, your duration is not going to change. It's absolutely fixed. And if you update your work, then again, duration is not going to change and your units are going to have to change accordingly. So one of the questions I get a lot is, what is the difference between work and duration? Because until you actually get into the scheduling and you see, because it can automatically calculate for you, but it doesn't have to. And a lot of times I get, but they're not the same. What is the main difference? Work is the amount of effort it takes for your resources, your people, to complete the task. Depending on their availability for that work, whether it's 8 hours a day or 6 hours a day, is important in that as well. But it could take you 5 days to complete a 2-hour task. I don't know who would do that, but it could. So in that case, those two would be those two would be different. And the duration is the actual time, elapsed time, the days, the weeks that it takes between your start and finish of your task. I'm going to look briefly at a schedule here so we can. So here is my sample schedule that we're going to look at today. I did enable my task mode for view here. You can see right now that I am in automatically scheduled. All of my tasks are going to be automatically scheduled. All of the tasks in this schedule are set to that task mode. And then I did display my task type here. The field name is actually just called type, but I did unhide it here so you could see it. You can see I have a fixed work across all of my subtasks. And then anything that is a roll-up is automatically going to be defined as a fixed duration task. So I entered in several different types of tasks here. I have my summary task, which is my scope up here. You could tell because it's bolded, and over here in the Gantt, it has a bracket. So you could see the summary of all the tasks underneath it. I have my tasks, my subtasks, regular tasks. These are what are the short verb, easy to read task names that are going to be the subparts to completing the overall stage or the phase. And then underneath that is my milestone. It marks the end of a phase or a stage, usually a deliverable, and project recognizes it by default as any task with a 0-day duration. So you can see here a 0 day. And over in my Gantt over here is a black diamond. So I repeated that process for a couple of different phases and stages here, the scope phase, analysis, and then a design. And today we're going to work on linking all of these together to create a super dynamic schedule. Go back to our. All right, so continuing with our tasks planning. These are the 4 steps involved in your task planning. First is entering your tasks, being able to have the small broken down pieces of your overall schedule into very achievable chunks. So the task is determine project scope, it's secure sponsorship, things like that that are very quick, easy, and tangible. And the next is estimating your work in duration. Now that you have your tasks identified, now you have to put some estimated effort to them. How long is it going to take in days? How many days is it going to take to complete a task? How much actual manpower or work is it going to take to complete a task? And what we're going to focus on today are the last 2 pieces of that, which are setting the task dependencies and then setting the constraints and deadlines for your tasks. Look at dependencies. So in order for you to have a dynamic schedule, you must have dependencies between your tasks. This is what really allows Microsoft Project all of the full capabilities of doing that scheduling engine. You're giving it all the information you have. The more you give it, the better. But you're giving all the information you have to Project, and you're asking it to return those values to you and to make those updates and your changes to your tasks between the relationships, updating, and pretty much all of that. You're giving it all to project. So when you link tasks, that is called being having a dependency work because one task is dependent on the outcome of another or the completion of another. By default, when you add a task, all tasks are scheduled to begin as soon as possible. That means that you have your start date for your project and all of the tasks are set to start at that same time as your project start date. In the sample schedule I just pulled up, all of my tasks, since they don't have any dependencies right now, any relationships are all set to start at that project start date as well. Oh, and I just said that. So until those dependencies are created, everything is scheduled from the project start. So in task dependencies, there are 2 pieces. There is the predecessor, which is the task that precedes or is dependent on. And then you have a successor task, which is the one that follows or has a task that it's dependent on. So in our example here, you could see we have that the first task is write the chapter, and then the second task is edit the chapter. Write the chapter is the predecessor because the edit the chapter is dependent on it. You cannot edit the chapter until it is first written, and so you have to create that relationship in project for it to tell you that. A task can have one or more predecessor relationships. With my milestones, I do usually tend to link them to all of the subtasks above it. I'll show you that in a demo today. So you can have multiple relationships. You can have tasks kind of jump all over the place if your schedule if you'd need to. But in order for it to have that definition of predecessor or successor, it does need to have a relationship associated with it. When dependencies are created in your project, they'll automatically adjust any of the tasks linked to that task after it. So one of the demonstrations we're going to do today is linking our tasks and then making a change to one of the beginning tasks in the schedule and just showing what all is going to change just because of a simple change that you make once everything is connected together. There are 4 types of dependencies. There is the finish to start one, which is the default. It is the most common, and it is what project will automatically do when you link your tasks, unless you say otherwise. There is a finish to finish and a start to start, and then a start to finish. There's a little image underneath each one so you can see what the Gantt will look like once you have associated those tasks together. The start to finish dependency is very rarely used, so we're not going to go over that one today, but the other 3 we will take a look at. So this one here is the finish to start relationship. This is defined by the finish date of the predecessor task determines the start date of the successor task. So in our example here, you can see we have task A and task B. Task A doesn't depend on anything. It will start as at the project start. And then task B is dependent on when task A finishes. So in the Gantt, you can see somewhere around December 13th, 2015 is when task A is going to finish. And immediately following that, task B can begin. So the predecessor task is sometimes called a driving predecessor because it drives the start of the successor task in this kind of relationship. A couple of other examples that I use, since I'm a baker, I use a baking one. So you have to bake the cake before you can decorate it. That is a very good example of a finish to start relationship because you can't decorate it unless you have started it, unless you have baked it. And then to do any kind of analysis, you have to first have something built. You have to have, a code built out. You need to have a document built out before you can do analysis of what had happened there. The next kind of dependency is a start to start dependency. And in this kind of dependency, the predecessor task must start before the successor task can start. The successor one can start at any time after the predecessor has started, but so meaning that they don't have to start at the same time, but the predecessor must start first. So you can see in the image up here that that's noted by in the predecessor column A1SS for start to start. And then off in the Gantt chart, there is that arrow from one to the next at the start of the task, showing that that's the kind of relationship there. So an example of a start to start relationship is baking a cake. If you have your first task as baking a cake and your second task is making icing, and you create that start to start, you're saying you can start making the icing anytime you bake a cake, but baking a cake must start first. So the third type of dependency we're going to talk about today is the finish to finish. The finish date of the predecessor task determines the finish date of the successor task. Similar to start, it does not require that both tasks are finished at the same time, but it does require that the first task is finished in order for the second one to finish. So in the image up here, you can see that's noted by the 1FF for finish to finish in that predecessor column. And then in the Gantt chart, it's the end of the tasks, the finish of them that's connected between the two. So sticking with our baking theme, we have our decorating cake and our delivering cake. If those are our 2 tasks, we have task 1 is decorate your cake. Task 2 is deliver the cake. So you can't do all of those. You can't deliver the cake before you decorate it. But so when your decorate cake is finished, then delivering the cake can be completed as well. So we're going to look at lag and lead time between your tasks. So a lag is a delay between the task and its predecessors. Once you have established the relationship between the tasks, you've just established that dependency, you still may need there to be some time between when the second task starts and the first task finishes. So a lag it allows for that gap to account for those delays between the tasks. A lag is entered as a positive number. When we jump into the schedule for some demos and some examples, I'll show you exactly how to enter that and what it looks like, and both in the Gantt and in your table. In the example here, you could see that the 3.2 configure project server task is delayed by 3 days. It has that positive 3 days at the end. It means that task 2 can start 3 days after task 1 finishes. If it was a normal finish to start relationship, you wouldn't see that plus 3 days, and task 2, that second task, would start immediately after that first task had finished. The lags are entered as a positive number because you are adding days to your schedule. That's the easy way to remember it. And then on the other side is lead, adding leads between your tasks. These are overlaps between the dependencies. It's the opposite of a lag. A lead is entered as a negative number because it takes days away from your schedule total. In the example down there at the bottom, you have configure SSRS reports, and that has a lead or a negative 2 days after that dependency. That means that task can start 2 days before the task before it has finished. And you can see in the graph over there, they have to get a little bit creative here, and you can see that that finish date for the first task does still have that arrow, does still have the nice image to connect it to the start of the next task, but that they do kind of overlap when you look at it at the Gantt chart. So to apply that lag and lead time, this is done in the task information box, which we will look at in more detail today for sure. And in the predecessor column, you just need to add, there is a column for lag. It is the same column that's used for either lag or lead time. If you enter a positive number, it's lag, but you can enter a negative number right there, and it's a lead time. So now we're going to go back to our sample schedule over here. There it is. And so first, you can see that my schedule is just straight. Everything starts on July 8th. Over in my Gantt chart here, everything has the same. They may have different size Gantt bars for the different days, the different durations, but everything starts at the same time right now. And unless that's how your schedule works, that's not actually what's going to be happening. So we are going to start with some linking of our tasks here. We're going to go all the way back up to the top. I'm going to select a couple of my tasks up here. I'm going to select determine project scope, and I'm going to use my cursor right here. It turns into a little arrow, and I'm going to drag it down all the way to my last task. I'm going to leave out my milestone for now, but I'm going to grab that whole section. In the task ribbon up here, which is where we'll primarily be focused today since we're talking about the tasks planning. In the schedule section here, there is a little chain link button, and this is your linking of your tasks. So any tasks that you have selected will be linked. And as we discussed, that finish to start relationship is the default for that. So when I click any automatic linking of the tasks, finish to start is what it will be. So you can see here, everything that has changed is highlighted in blue. All of these tasks have been pushed out so that they don't start till that predecessor task has begun. You can see that over in the table here. You can see in my predecessor column, there is now a number. This is the ID number. This is this number right here to identify what task line it's on. So if you have any other numbers, in your schedule to identify tasks for you, this won't reflect that number. This is a system generated number, and it will tell you what that relationship is. And then over in the Gantt over here, you can see it now has pushed out. You can see it'll go from task determine project scope to secure sponsorship to define resources and then to secure resources. So I'm going to go ahead and link my milestone task. This may be a newer way to do that, but you can click here in your predecessor with a drop down. And depending on your version of project, you'll either see all of the same things I do here where you see the task ID and the name, or you may just see the task number in here. This is a recent update, so it depends on your version. But you can select one or multiple items here. Like I said, I do like in my schedules to link all of the subtasks above it because for this to be truly dependent, all of my tasks have been done for scope. It's not just dependent on secure core resources, it's dependent on all of these tasks. So I'm going to select all of them. And you can just click away. And you can see it's identified all of those in there with a comma afterwards to say it's dependent on all of them. So if only 3 of them are done, it is not going to mark this milestone as complete. All of these need to be 100% complete for this schedule to move on. Let's scooch over here in our Gantt. Just going to click it. Let's click scroll to task up at the top. It'll automatically jump your project schedule to it. And you can see that it has given, I'll scooch up a little bit more here. It has moved my milestone out to be the end when everything has completed. And you could say each task has its own specific relationship with that milestone. That's why there are so many lines here. So each one is dependent. That milestone is dependent on each one of those. So I am going to do my linking by stages or phases. I'm going to do a couple sections at a time, and then we're going to link the entire schedule together. So I'm going to focus on my analysis section next. I'm going to look at my define preliminary software. Do this one. We're going to go all the way through. All the way through my end one here. We're going to come back up here to tasks. We're going to do our linking. And again, you can see everything in blue is changed. So not only is my subtask here my analysis task, my project summary task, my line 0, the highest summary of everything in my entire project schedule has also been updated. You can see that in blue, it's pushed out now my schedule. I can see over in the predecessor the task IDs, these numbers over here for all my relationships. And then in my Gantt, it creates that relationship. Skipping over the weekends because I have my calendar told it to, and it's going to schedule all of my work there for me. So I'm going to link this milestone now. So instead of using my drop down here, you can go ahead and type in the task IDs that you want to do. So I'm going to type in all of them. Maybe I should have chosen one with less relationships here. Oopsies. I'm going to type in all of the tasks in my analysis task so they each can have their own relationship with this milestone. So once I do that and I go ahead and hit enter, then I can see over in my Gantt, my milestone was pushed out to July 22nd, and each of the tasks in my analysis phase has their own relationship. So in order for analysis complete to actually be marked complete by project, all those tasks before it need to be done. I'm going to do the similar thing for my design here. I'm going to go ahead and click all of mine except for my milestone. Go ahead and click my link them up here. And I am going to go ahead and use my drop down this time. A little bit easier navigation. There we go. And click off. And so now all of my phases have been linked together. Not together as an entire project yet, but within each specific task, they have their own little dependencies. So I'm going to add in a new task. You may have some tasks that are kind of over everything, such as like a project management task. So I'm going to come up here to one. I'm going to insert a new task. You can either right click, include, and choose insert, or you can do it up in your task ribbon here. Task, I'm going to click new task. And I'm going to call this task project management. Oops. And so I would like this task to start at the same time as this one. That way it's not, I don't have to have a finish to start relationship there, but I would like there to be some kind of relationship between these two tasks since this is the first one on my schedule. So I'm going to come over here. My task 3 determine project scope does not have any relationship to any predecessor relationships right now. I'm going to go ahead and just type in 1 to reference project management line and then hit SS for start to start. And you can see that those two tasks now have that start to start relationship. So if you have other tasks in your schedule that also need to have that, you have different sections, you have several versions of summary tasks to do a hierarchy in your plan, and you need them all to start at the same time, then you could do something like this as well. So now we're going to link our scope phase to our analysis phase to our design phase. That way our entire schedule from top to bottom will all be linked together. So I'm going to look. You can see right now my first task in my analysis phase does not have a relationship It's starting when the project starts, and it's just going to kind of working independently right now. So the task that I do need to link that to is the very last phase, my milestone of the one before it. I'm going to go ahead and click that one, and then you can hold down the control key and then highlight that one. So similar to when we highlighted several rows that were right next to each other, we're going to just doing these, kind of individually. But we're going to go ahead and click on that link button here in the task ribbon. So you can see by doing that, it says once the milestone is completed, it's going to jump to task 9, which is conduct needs analysis. And everything in blue has been pushed out as a result of that change that I made. It increased the duration for my project to 18.5 days estimated, which is the question mark. And then it updated all of the start and finish days for the tasks in the analysis. I'm going to do a similar to this one right here, the first task in the design, review software specifications. This time I'm going to go ahead and type it in. I know that I need task ID 15. That's my milestone task. So I could type in 15 right here and hit enter. And a similar way the change is made, you could see the change right here, also appear at my project summary task. Then now over here, my Gantt, it's dynamic enough that it requires me to scroll. So I'm going to scroll. You can see everything. So there we have a milestone. Then we have our next summary task. Keep scrolling. Everything is related here. This is where the scroll on task comes in handy. Gives you a very easy way to adjust it. Again, you can zoom in and out over here, depending on what time scale you want to see. If you want to see it by weeks or months, depending on the length of your project, you have the ability to adjust what you see here. So now if I make any changes to a task in the scope phase, so I'm going to update this to be a 10-day duration task, it's going to push out everything else because everything is linked with that default start to finish to start relationship. You can see everything was updated because of that one change that I made. Go ahead and undo that. So the next thing we were going to review was the leads and lags. The lags are times that added to your schedule. They're noted by a positive number between when one task finishes and the next task begins. We're going to go ahead and say that between these two tasks, determine project scope and secure sponsorship, I need there to be a delay. I need there to be a 3-day delay between those two tasks. So you can double click on the task to open up task information, or in the task ribbon, you can click on information right there, and it'll pull up at the same task information box. So in our predecessor, since we're talking about relationships, it's all going to be a predecessors and successors. You can see it identifies here any task that it has a predecessor with. We only have one, can be multiple if you have a complex schedule like that. And then in our lag column over here, we're going to say 3 days because we want there to be a 3-day lag or a lapse between when the second task starts. I'm going to do that and click OK. So now my predecessor column, it notes that I have a finish to start relationship with task 3 plus 3 days. So you can see it pushed out 3 days. You have July 8th over here, and then July 11th is when my next task is scheduled to begin. So in a similar way, that change did trickle down to the rest of my schedule. Noted over here, you can see there is a gap. Let's zoom back in a little bit more. There is a gap now right here in my Gantt chart. There are these 3 days where no work is scheduled to be completed. We're going to go ahead and undo that. And you may have some tasks that have the opposite effect. You need to have some leads where it's maybe not a true start to start relationship, but you do need there to be some overlap, or there can be some overlap in your schedule. So we're going to say define resources and secure resources. We can say that maybe those can have a little bit of overlap in the time that it's completed. Let's choose tasks that have more time on them. Let's choose our analysis down here. Maybe you can start to draft your specifications a couple of days before conduct needs analysis is completed. So we're going to go ahead and open up our task information box by double clicking. And then in our lag over here, instead of putting a positive number, we're going to put a negative number. We're going to say this can start 2 days before the last task is going to finish. I'll go ahead and put my -2 in here. Let's look over at our dates here before we click OK. We can set it's set to schedule the same day that starts. So we're going to go ahead and hit OK. And because there's a weekend, it looks like there's more days, but that did take 2 days away from my schedule, my overall start to finish. So now this task can start 2 days before the task before it has ended. And then over here, let's zoom in a little bit more again. You can see that these two tasks overlap. There is still the finish to start, finish of one, start to another, but now they overlap, and you can just see that very visually by the bars being on top of each other. Let me go ahead and undo that lag time there. So next we're going to talk about constraints and deadlines. They are definitely related, but they are also very different. A constraint is a restriction, a scheduling restriction or limitation that's placed on a task. These should be used very sparingly in project because anytime you put an actual start or finish date just by typing it in, you put almost a stake in the ground for project scheduling. It says, I can't do anything with this task. So you have told me it has to start on this day or it has to finish on this day, and it'll just schedule right around it. So instead of having that dynamic schedule, like we just showed, where you change the duration of task number one and it trickles down, it will only go so far until you have that task with a constraint on it. A constraint is noted by, you can see by the image at the bottom there, you have an indicators column, and it's noted by a calendar. And if you hover over it, it'll tell you exactly what constraint has been placed on that task. The one here has a start no earlier than constraint. And so you can see there are several kinds. As soon as possible is the default kind of constraint that's put in there because the schedule wants to start and flow as soon as possible. It wants to get everything done efficiently. That is the most commonly used one. There are also a couple others. You have as late as possible, finish no earlier or later than, must finish or start on, and then start no earlier or later than. And there's a brief description of each one here, but all except those top two require you to put in a date. They have to have a finish no earlier than October 31st, for example. To set a constraint, this is done primarily, there is a column for that, but usually in task information, it's a bit easier to see and have that control over. If you just double click or click on the task information, it'll pull up your box. And in your advanced tab there are where you have a couple, we'll also look at deadlines here, but constraints in particular, where you have that option to put it here. You have constraint type right here. This one is a finish no later than, and then here is where you can define your date. And I'm going to repeat because I think it's very important that it is important to avoid musts by typing in the start and finish dates unless you absolutely need to do that. So a deadline is a target date indicating when you want a task or milestone to be completed. This is different than a constraint because it does not interfere with the scheduling engine. This is just a way for you to put into your schedule what some deadlines are. For example, if you have, like we did in our demo here, we did a schedule, everything is finished to start. I'm going to create a very dynamic flowing schedule. Everything is scheduled to start as soon as possible, right after the task before it has completed. And that allows me to know what my schedule can do, what should it do. But if I know that for one of my milestones, I have a deadline, maybe it doesn't coincide with the scheduling engine. Maybe it's 3 or 4 days later. That's my deadline outside of the tool. I can put that into the tool. I can say, here's my deadline, and it will alert me with this exclamation point here that my task has gone past the deadline that I set for it. So setting deadlines is very, very helpful to do because it gives you that visual cue that then something's gone past the deadline without actually affecting the scheduling of your project. Still gives it very dynamic scheduling, but it still alerts you like, hey, pay attention to me. So we're going to look at constraints here just a little bit because you should avoid them as much as you possibly can. And so I'm going to go ahead and enter in a column here called constraint type, just so we can see what all of ours are. As I mentioned, as soon as possible is the default one, and that's what I have all of my tasks set for here. I'm going to hide my Gantt chart a little bit there. I can look at it in more detail. I'm going to go ahead and double click on my determine project scope, or you can click on your task information up here. And I'm going to go to my advanced tab. And in this middle section here is where you can define what kind of constraint you want to put on your task. There is no date required for as soon as possible or as late as possible, so those have NA there. I'll go ahead and cancel here. So if you need to put a constraint in, or a lot of times I see schedules where a lot of people said, I know I need this task to start on this date, so I just typed it in. Pick a different task. Let's pick this task. I know I need the analysis to start on July 31st. So if you do that, you do get this planning wizard pop up. It says, you've done something that's going to break the default scheduling that you have already put in place there. It's saying, they are linked, but if you do this, they're not going to be linked anymore. So we can either move the task or we can keep it, So we're going to go ahead and say, we want to go ahead and move our task. As you see, it breaks that connection here. And now this task is no longer linked. Go back and do it again. So we could choose this next option. We can say, yeah, we're going to go ahead and keep the link, but I am going to knowingly put a constraint in here. So we're going to keep the link, keep the task, keep my date. We'll go ahead and click OK. So it still keeps the link. It updates everything after that. But you can see over here, this has changed. By typing in a start date, I now have that constraint of start no later than. So if anything in this top section changes, such as this define preliminary resources, I thought it was going to take 5 days. Now it's going to take 10. I'm going to type that in. And it will only schedule up until the point where I have that constraint. Because I have told project this task can't start any earlier than this. Absolutely not. So we're going to change this one back. Start as soon as possible, please. And in the same way, we're gonna type in a finish date here. So let's go ahead and do just one for maybe August 15th. And by doing that, I'm saying that this task absolutely cannot finish earlier than the date that I have typed in. So if phase 1 gets done quickly and it gets done a little bit sooner, I have told project don't touch the second phase. Just leave it alone, leave it where it is. Go ahead and hide my constraints here. Hide you. So now we're going to look at deadlines. There is a deadlines column here, so I'm going to enter it in. I'm going to remove this deadline. I want to have clean deadlines for us here. I'm going to go ahead and hide my resource name here. So by having NA, I have said that I don't have any deadlines in my plan just yet. That's the default, and that's pretty typical. And again, deadlines are target dates. They're not scheduling dates, they're target dates. They're usually outside the tool. A lot of times I like to set mine for milestones because it will tell me outside of what my schedule says I'm going to do, this is when I have a due date or I would like it to be done. So I'm going to look at my scope complete milestone here, and I'm going to set my deadline date to be 3 days after it's supposed to have finished. I'm going to type it in here. So I'm going to go ahead and put this. We're going to do this the 21st. I know that's 4 days, not 3. So I'm going to go ahead and put my deadline date in for that. So you can see over in the Gantt, I have a new icon here. I have this green downwards arrow that lets me know I have a milestone for that task, and it shows me exactly visually where that is. So you see it over here. And so now I am going to scroll back so you can see a lot of columns we're dealing with here. Let's collapse you a little bit. So I am now going to update one of these tasks to have a 10-day duration. I'm going to say this one's taking longer. So I'm going to update that to be 10 days duration. So once that happens, my finish date is now scheduled to be past the deadline date that I have set. You can see that in the Gantt over here. But more importantly, you can see in your indicators column over here, you now have a brand new icon. And this tells you that your task is now past your deadline that you've set. So you can hover it over here and it'll tell you exactly what this means. So if you do see it, you can have it here. So I'm going to go ahead and undo my change. I'm going to do that back to 5 days. We'll say everything's still on track. I'm going to look now at my analysis complete milestone. We're going to go ahead and set a deadline for that. This time I'm going to do it by opening up my task information box. I'm going to go to my advanced tab here if you're not already. And then you have a deadline right here, a deadline line. Right now it's set to NA. And in a similar way you could do it in the fields, you can identify it right here. I'm going to go ahead and type it in. I'm going to just do a couple of days past that task right there. Let's do it for 8/5. Click OK. It'll update my deadline date, and then over in my Gantt here, I'll have my arrow, just that visual cue of where I need that to be. And then I'm going to do the last one here as well for my design. I'm going to go ahead and type it in here. Just it's a little bit easier. So I can see I have that visual cue. So now I have a deadline set for all of the milestones that I have. So one of the things that I like about Project is there are a lot of different ways you can view the same information. In the View tab up here, you have some out of the box highlighting, filtering, viewing. For example, if I want to highlight my milestones, it'll automatically highlight milestones. But one of the ones that they don't have by default is one for deadlines. So we're going to set up a new filter for deadlines. That way it'll only, if I need to see where all my deadlines are at, I can go ahead and see it here, any that are overdue specifically. So I'm going to come to my filter up here. Since it's not one out of the box, I wish they would put that in there, but then I wouldn't get the chance to teach you guys how to create a new filter. So I'm going to put in my drop down here. I'm going to go ahead and create new filter. And I'm going to give it a name. You can name it deadline filter, deadline overdue filter, whatever you'd like it to see. And then down here under my field name, I'm going to click the drop down. I'm going to find my deadline. You can scroll or you can just hit D. It'll jump you down to at least the D section. So I'm going to say I want to know when my deadline is less than my finish date or my finish date has passed the deadline. That means the same thing. So I'm going to say when my deadline is less than my finish date. And type an F so I can get there quicker. And so once I have my criteria set, what I'm telling the filter to do, I usually recommend checking this show related summary rows because this will tell you what phase or stage that deadline belongs to. Otherwise, it'll just be a list of milestones and you might not know, especially if you have similar names, which one it belongs to. Go ahead and check that there. And then once you have this ready to go, click save. I already have a deadline filter, so I'm going to go ahead and click cancel, but you should definitely hit save. And so now that I've done that, I'm going to say, I'm going to update this back to be 10 days. And you can see that all of my deadlines have now gotten pushed out. So I'm going to go ahead and click my filter up here, look at my deadline filter, and it's going to show me all of the deadlines that have a finish date past my deadline date over here. I'm going to go ahead and clear this out. We'll do one more. Let's update this back to 5 days, but maybe now I have this task here that's going to last 6 days, and it's going to push only this one last milestone out. So now if I come back and apply my filter, I'm only going to have that one task. And there are several different ways you can use the filters. Other than this, you could play around with it. There are a lot of default fields if you need to do some comparisons of start and finish date. You could do that here. Let me go ahead and clear my filter out here. So now that everything has been linked, you have some dependencies between your tasks. You have a real dynamic relationship. You have hopefully a flexible constraints, unless you absolutely need to. There are cases where you do. And everything's linked together. Now, maybe you need to see, all right, now everything's linked where I think it's actually going to happen. I need to check and see, some project statistics. I need to see when my scheduled finish date is. And you can see that by looking up here at line 0. If you don't have line 0 displayed, it's in the Format tab, almost all the way here on the right-hand side. There's a checkbox to turn it on and off, just for this project. Or because I think it is so, so important, I'm going to show you how to do it in Options so it's always on. Then Schedule here. Oh, goodness gracious. Move around some settings on me. So it's in Advanced here, and then under Display Options, you can make this change be to all projects, and then you have Show Project Summary Tasks. So any new project you start in your version of project, it'll show that summary task for you. So here you can see I have my project start date of July 8th, and based on all of the things I have told project, all the relationships, the durations, the estimates, everything that I have said so far, I have a finish date of August 28th. So that's one way you can see how long your project's going to take. It'll calculate automatically that duration for you. And you can also do that from the timeline up here. It automatically puts those dates on there for you. It has your start date over here, then you have your finish date. We did talk about how to modify your timeline during the first webinar, but very, very briefly, you can just right click and you can add things to your timeline. You can add milestones, you can add phases. So you have a real, visually pleasing way to display some task information, pertinent information, high level information with your managers or key stakeholders. And with that. And there is also a project statistics box. We're going to go to project. So if I go to project and project information, here is where we came a couple of weeks ago just to set your start date and look at your calendars. There is a statistics box down here that you can click on, and it'll give you a couple of stats about your project. This is where another way you can see start and finish date. And then once you get actuals put to your project, you can see some variance here compared to baselines, which we'll talk about, actual remaining work. Just gives you a quick snapshot of what's going on. All right, so that is the end of our tasks planning 2 for today. We do have our resource planning webinar next week. We'll do a lot of scenario-based activities about adding resources and what happens when your tasks, when you have them in different task modes or different task types rather. What happens when you add resources, we'll do some playing around with those numbers to make sure it shows you what you're supposed to have and what you're supposed to see. And then the next one after that, we're going to skip the week of the 14th, and we are going to look at that next week about assignment planning and look at a little bit more detail there.